another meeting at this hotel. She's been very supportive of our D.C., Maryland, Virginia chapter, and we're very fortunate here today to say a few words. I'd like to introduce Nancy Marriott.
Good afternoon or good morning yet. Good morning still. I came down for our annual stockholders meeting next door, and I saw ALS. And I just stopped everything right there because my father died of ALS many years ago in 1964. And so I quickly went through the stockholders meeting, and I have a music rehearsal at my home in exactly 1 hour. But I stopped by here because I said, these are my friends. Anyone that is going through the disease of ALS or has a family member, it's a family bond, and you can't explain it to anyone. It's just something you have to go through. And I want you to know that I have been through it. My father was diagnosed and lived for 4 years, and this is before they had medicines to kind of help slow things down. And I saw it firsthand, and I know the heartbreak that it is, not only for the family, but for the patient. And my father, I can only speak from a personal experience, was very, very active, very quick mind, and to know that he was locked in that shell with not being able to speak, but then he wrote, and of course, then as you well know, you can't write. And you wonder why the Lord does this. And maybe it's to see our reaction of how we react as family members as well, and perhaps strengthen us as individuals. Because there's no rhyme nor reason. Nobody knows how you get this other than a virus. And there's no cure, even though they've come close to it and they're still working on it. But there's hope, and there's the desire. And I want you to know, at the very end, I was pregnant with our first child. And I saw my father at the Stanford Hospital. It was the time we were at a convention in San Francisco. And then I went to see my father in Palo Alto, California. And he had been put in the Stanford Hospital because my mother and helper, it was time in summary. And my father was so pleased that I was pregnant because this would be the next generation. And even though I had 2 older brothers, they didn't have children yet. And so at the very end, my father couldn't speak, he couldn't write, he was very weak. My watch he could put around his wrist, and he was quite husky man at the time, not fat, but just husky. But he'd gotten that thin. But our love through our eyes was there. And when I would ask him questions, a yes question would be 1 blink, and a no question would be 2 blinks. And the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life was to tell my father goodbye because I knew I'd never see him again. But because of my faith, I believe in the hereafter, and I believe we'll be whole. And I believe that the Lord will take care and make things even if we stay true and faithful to what we believe and the spirit that has been given to us to survive all this, not only the patient, but the family. And so I just thought, when I saw the ALS, I said, I know I have this rehearsal I've got to run home to, but I said, I've just got to stop by and just say hello. So I pray for you each night that you might be blessed for the strength to be able to continue with the challenge of ALS, whether it be you as a person or as a family member, because it entails, it's like a ripple in the water when the stone's thrown. It involves everyone, and it's not selective. It could happen to anyone. So know that as a family member who saw her father go through it, I have had many of the same feelings, and that you will be blessed and strengthened as a family unit in the eternities if you stay close to your Heavenly Father, whatever faith it may be. And that's it. And thank you for letting me take a few minutes to talk with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Marriott, for sharing your story and for your support. Before we start this next session, is Dr. Traynor here? Brian Traynor? He's here. Do you want to come up and make an announcement quick? He has an important research project he's working on. He wants to make sure everyone knows about that.
Good afternoon, everybody, or is it good morning? Still don't know. So I just want to say thank you very much to the ALS Association for allowing us for yet another year to come down here to DC and to arrange for any individuals who might want to give us some blood samples for our DNA research, for our genetics research, to be able to do so. We're all set up. We're in actually a little bit different location from last year. We're at the back left-hand side, the most back left-hand side on this floor, and we've got a team of us there waiting for you to come, and we'd be delighted to enroll you in our research study. So again, thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian. So our session title today is the FDA. And for some of you, you might think that we've just started working with the FDA. Well, actually, we've had a wonderful relationship with the FDA for the last decade or so and have been working with them on various projects, various discussions, various meetings. And we do this actually with our partner, the Muscular Dystrophy Association, MDA. Annie Kennedy is right up here. Welcome. And if those of you who have been to many of our conferences know that we've had actually breakout sessions on the FDA. Well, this year we are, as Lucy will share later, excited about a couple clinical trials. As Senator Murkowski mentioned, we have a new law that was passed that was included for Fda to help speed the process along. So we thought it might be the time to begin the dialogue with all the advocates. We, in February, had a hearing nearby at the FDA headquarters in Rockville, and that we partnered with the MDA to be part of that. And in fact, we had, I think, almost every ALS organization that's in the United States there presenting their story, which is very, very helpful. Today, we're going to take an opportunity to do two things. One, to help you understand what the FDA does, which for some of you might say, well, of course we know what the FDA does. We've learned that there's many advocates who think the FDA actually produces drugs. And that's something that most of us know. But I think perhaps when you're facing this horrific disease, it's hard to sort out things. And so as we showed the slide at the first session on Wednesday of the drug development process, we're going to continue that journey and talk about that. We're fortunate first to have Dr. Richard Bedlock, who you all met, if you haven't met him, when he received our Advocate of the Year award, to talk about that process and begin that discussion and how all of you can be helpful. Because as more and more research develops through phase 3 and through opportunities for people to see if there is efficacy for these trials coming up, it's very important that we actually understand this process. This is something that is not just what the ALS associations does or the ALS groups do. This is something that other disease groups do. HIV groups, the breast cancer groups, as well as the Parkinson's groups have all started this sort of dialogue to help educate folks. And Dr. Bedlock actually has a course and a class we'll tell you about. And so without further ado, Dr. Bedlock.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to share this stage today with Steve and David, and I'm especially grateful that neither of them are wearing the same jacket. It's always kind of embarrassing when that happens at a meeting. So the title of my talk today is It's Not the FDA's Fault: Why We Don't Have a Cure for ALS and What We Can Do About It. Now, where did this title come from? It came from this observation. So as you remember, in February, the FDA held a hearing, and I heard that hearing remotely. I was not able to attend, and I heard many eloquent and passionate testimonies from patients and caregivers affected by ALS. And in those testimonies, I heard, not surprisingly, a lot of anger and frustration. I feel those same things. I'm not happy that we don't have better things to offer you for ALS. But what was surprising was that it seemed to me a lot of the anger and frustration was actually being directed at the FDA. For example, I heard the following quote, "ALS is fast. We need the FDA to be faster." What I would like to do in my talk today is show you what I think the barriers are to us finding a cure for ALS, show you why I do not think the FDA is primarily to blame, show you what you can do to help us break down one of those barriers, and I'll even give you very specific advocacy action plans. So what are the barriers? Well, first of all, we don't know what causes most cases of ALS. Second, we don't understand why once people get this disease, unlike a lot of other diseases such as polio, they can't clear it. They just keep getting worse. Third, it takes a long time to make a diagnosis of ALS, more than a year from symptom onset to diagnosis. Fourth, the ways that we measure ALS are noisy and slow to change. And as a result, our clinical trials have to comprise hundreds of patients and go on for many months or even a year to be sure that we found something. Next, it's a rare disease with limited resources. And finally, enrollment in ALS research studies is surprisingly low. So which one of those things does the FDA control? Doesn't control any of them, right? The FDA does not make or sell ALS treatments. The FDA does not conduct research on ALS as a disease or on the tests that we use to diagnose or follow ALS or on the treatments. What the FDA does is define a pathway by which drugs and diseases can be approved for use on label in the United States. And in fact, this pathway has actually saved us from some really bad premature decisions in recent years. Remember the excitement of lithium and dexpramipexole? Both of those had preliminary data that looked like they would work really well for ALS. Dexpramipexole didn't work any better than placebo, and lithium actually made people get worse faster than placebo once we did all the right studies. In fact, the FDA has actually made great strides in recent years to shorten and improve this pathway. They've partnered with industry, and they've incentivized companies by things called the orphan drug status. There's a drug that's under development right now where the company's taking advantage of that. That's called CK2017357. They've got something called the humanitarian use device status, which allowed the diaphragm pacemaker to be approved very quickly. And they've got a number of other programs, fast track, accelerated approval, and priority review that speed things along for companies. The FDA has also been open to partnerships with patients and caregivers affected by ALS. So there's a fantastic patient page that is pretty new on the FDA website, which I would encourage you to go home and read. You know about the hearings. And there's one more thing I wanted to make sure you were aware of, and that is the FDA Patient Representative Program. Is anyone out there in the crowd a FDA patient representative? No. So I would encourage you to go and take a look at this section of the FDA's website that outlines how you can go about being an FDA patient representative. Today, I do not feel that this pathway is the limiting step in developing better therapies, but that could change. You heard about all the exciting progress that we're making on those other barriers from Lucy's talk today, and it may not be long before the pathway is the limiting step. And when that happens, it's going to be important to have people who really understand ALS that are working closely with the FDA. So now is the time to get involved. So again, I feel like we are slowly making progress around some of these things that have stumped us for the past 140 years. You heard from Lucy about the fact that we're figuring out some of the genetic causes of ALS. We can now explain somewhere around 10 to 15% of all cases. The National ALS Registry, the data from that is going to be coming out later this year. And hopefully we'll get some clues as to why the other 85% of cases are happening. With some of the advances in animal studies, we've been able to understand disease progression like never before. We understand the roles of non-neuronal cells and the roles of something called a prion-like property that some of the proteins in ALS acquire. We're developing better biomarkers to help us diagnose and follow the disease more efficiently. And we've become more organized as a group. Events like this help to make sure that even though this is still a rare disease, we have a very strong voice and we get a lot of resources to study it. But there's one barrier that I don't think we're making as much progress in, and that's the last one, this enrollment problem. It may surprise you to learn that if we look at databases from large ALS clinics, only somewhere between 2 and 10% of people affected by ALS ever enroll in an ALS research study. If we look at something called an enrollment rate, which is the number of participants per site per month in a published clinical trial, it's about 2. And most clinics that are doing these trials see anywhere between 40 and 50 patients in a month. So that's pretty low in terms of a percentage. What's really bad is this doesn't seem to be improving over time. So this graph shows the enrollment rate in published clinical trials dating all the way back to 1993. And you can see that it really isn't moving. It's bouncing around a lot, but it's not moving. So the bouncing around is interesting. The enrollment rate ranges anywhere from 0.1 to almost 8 patients per site per month. And that suggests to me that some of these studies might be doing something different that's allowing them to enroll patients much faster and therefore get their studies done faster than others. So what might that be? Well, the first thing I thought of was that there's some trials that are just more attractive to patients than others. And so what we did is we tried to go through and we tried to model that variability in enrollment. And we tried to figure out, was there some trial design factor that might explain that variability? And so we looked at all these different trial design factors. We looked at whether the primary outcome of the trial was a safety or efficacy, whether it was a phase 2 or phase 3, whether the thing that we were studying was invasive or not, whether the thing that we were studying was available outside the study or not, whether it was a single-center study or a multi-center study, whether it had a placebo group, what the ratio of treatment to placebo group was. And also we looked at whether the trial had a disease duration inclusion or an FVC inclusion rule. And guess what? None of these things explained the variability in enrollment that we were seeing. So if it's not trial design factors that affect enrollment, then what is it? Well, the good news is that we're not the only field to have this problem. They have this problem in cancer, where less than 5% of patients enroll, and they have this problem in just about every other neurological disease that tries to do trials. And some of these folks, especially the cancer folks, have been studying this for a long time. Cancer's been studying this now for about 15 years. And all these groups, as well as us, did surveys to try to understand what the problem might be. And these surveys all suggest the same things. It appears that it's doctor factors and patient factors, not trial factors, that determine the enrollment rate. What are some of these doctor factors? Well, first of all, many doctors out there that see patients with ALS are not even aware of all the different trial options that are out there. Second, some doctors are concerned that if they put a patient into a clinical trial, they will lose control over what happens to the patient, or that they're going to have more paperwork to deal with. And then finally, some doctors, including some that actually participate in clinical trials, are just not very excited about the trials that they're participating in. Then there's the patient factors. Many patients are not aware of their research options. Patients are appropriately concerned about some of the burdens that they might encounter when they come into a research study. These burdens include things like the number of miles they have to travel and the number of visits they have to make. Also, the number of times they get poked with sharp objects. Patients are concerned about unexpected costs. Patients are concerned about this comment, quote unquote, being a guinea pig. So many times over the years when I've asked the patient if they wanted to be in a trial, the answer back was no, and I follow that up by asking why, and they say, I don't really want to be a guinea pig. So I ask them, what does that mean? And they say, I'm afraid that if I sign that piece of paper, you'll be able to do whatever you want to me. even without telling me. Now, why would people think that? Because it actually happened in the past, including in this country. There are some pretty famous examples, one of which occurred in Tuskegee, Alabama, where people were lied to. They were enrolled in a research study, and the Tuskegee Experiment was actually a study of syphilis, in which they were told that a new treatment for syphilis was going to be studied. What was actually being studied was how syphilis affected the body when treatment was withheld. And so the people who signed that piece of paper actually came in and had the treatment for syphilis withheld. And it was documented how the syphilis affected their bodies and eventually killed them. There are now a number of programs, oversight programs in place to prevent something like that from ever happening again. Patients are concerned that if they come into a clinical trial, their doctor might not tell them about other exciting things that are out there that they could be involved with. There's also some confusion out there about the research process in general. Sometimes we do studies where all we want to do is collect blood on patients, biomarker or genetic studies. And when patients say no, again, I ask why, and I'm told, well, I already gave you blood last year. Why don't you just use some of that for the study? And the thing is, I think a lot of folks don't understand that every time we want to do anything with your body or any part of it, we have to tell you exactly what we're going to do and get you to sign a piece of paper that gives us permission. We can't just take your blood and then use it for whatever we want after that. And then finally, the last one, choosing an alternative or off-label therapy. Okay, so now that we understand this particular enrollment problem, there's actually some very nice opportunities for us to influence it. We can go after some of these doctor and patient factors that seem to be modifiable. We can promote awareness of research options. We can work to reduce some of these burdens. We can clear up some of the misconceptions that are out there amongst research, and we can carefully review alternative and off-label therapies. I'm going to spend a couple minutes now talking about the first three of these. I will talk about the fourth one this afternoon in my myths and facts section. It's never been easier than it is right now to learn about your specific research opportunities. We have a website called clinicaltrials.gov. It's very comprehensive. I know it's not very user-friendly. We heard this from patients a couple years ago, and our community worked to make it even easier. So we now have another search engine, which is on the Northeast ALS Consortium website. It's the second link there at the bottom of the slide. And to make it even easier, we have something called a trial concierge. So just like you might use the hotel concierge to book your dinner reservations tonight, you can call or email the Niels Trial Concierge, tell them where you are and a little bit about what your ALS looks like, and they will try to help you find a trial. And we've worked with the National Registry so that if you sign up for this, you can check a box. And that gives us permission to actually reach back out to you through the registry if we have a trial open that you look like you might qualify for. And I'm excited to say there are a lot of research options out there right now. If you search clinicaltrials.gov, there are 73 open studies. So is there anyone in here who has not been able to participate in an ALS research study? I see one in the back. Okay. Did you know that the National ALS Registry was a research study? Did you participate in that? So you have participated in a research study. Okay? It's very important to spread the word about that. So I think a lot of patients don't understand what the registry is even now. It's important to spread the word that that is going to help us in so many ways, but it is a research project that every single patient with ALS in the country can participate in. There's a lot of other studies open that are looking at biomarkers and looking for new genes that might cause ALS or explain the variability, and those are also open to every patient with ALS. We are working as a group nationwide to try to make the burdens as small as possible for you. And part of this means building more ALS clinics around the country. And so the ALS Association is kind of helping us to map where we should put these clinics. We're also trying to roll research out to more clinics. And the Northeast ALS Consortium now is having research open at over 100 clinics in North America, which is impressive. In some of our new studies, we're developing ways to measure things in you at your home so you don't have to come into the clinic for every visit. So we've got some things that we can do in the arimoclomol study at home, and those of you that were in the dexpramipexole study know that a lot of those were home visits and not study visits at the site. We can go after these misconceptions that patients have. First of all, this one that they might encounter out-of-pocket costs when they come into a research study. Most legitimate research studies have funding. Insurance, including Medicare, has specific language that says they will usually pay even for complications that arise out of a legitimate clinical trial that you are in. The guinea pig idea. Legitimate studies have oversight and informed consent that require investigators to notify patients of exactly what will be done to them. That's why our consent forms are usually 20 to 30 pages long. And we are also required by law to notify you of all your other options every time we see you over the course of the study, so you're not locked in to just that. And then the question about placebos. You know, using anecdotal reports, using lead-in designs, using historical controls, I think those are all great for early experience with a drug, but we have learned the hard way that only large, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials can truly tell us whether a drug works or not. All right, so I've shown you the problem, and I've shown you some solutions. How specifically can we roll those out over the rest of the year? These are called advocacy action plans. Everybody, I think, has an idea of what advocacy is, but it's helpful to review the dictionary definition of it. It's acts of pleading, educating, or arguing in favor of something such as a cause, idea, or policy. So I've shown you what the idea or the cause might be. What about the person and the acts? Well, the person is called an advocate. And what makes a good advocate? Motivation, empathy, persistence, charisma, creativity, interpersonal skills, stuff that everybody in this room has in droves. But guess what? Did you see anybody else talking to the congressman yesterday on the Hill? They all have that stuff too. Okay? So that doesn't really set us apart. This is what sets us apart. We have powerful stories that stay with the congressman long after we leave. So if you have not already done this, I would encourage you to write down your story. I would encourage you to hone it to a fine, sharp edge. Make it short and powerful, and use pictures if you can. Have two versions of it. One's a 5-minute version. If you get that much time, the other one's a 1-minute version. If you want to read my story, it's on my Facebook page. Should give you at least a good chuckle. So what are the specific acts that you advocates can do to help spread the word about research and enrollment? Well, speaking at a support group, how many people have done that? All right. Speaking at a fundraiser. Interviews. Good. How about writing in a newspaper? There still are newspapers out there that some people read. How about writing in patient-centric literature? Has anybody put an article together for something that patients read, like Neurology Now? Excellent. Writing in blogs and social networks. I know a lot of you do that because I see you online. Okay? So those are some specific things. Now, if anybody has some quick questions about how to do those things, or if you would like some guidance on putting together a slide deck, or even use my slides that I use when I speak to these different groups, come on over and see me sometime today and give me your email address, and I'll be happy to set up some communication with you. If you would like very intense formalized training on how to be a more effective research advocate, I would encourage you to become something called a research ambassador. So how do you do that? Well, you attend one of these ALS clinical research learning institutes that we've been putting together over the past couple of years. Now, we learned about these from other programs in cancer and Parkinson's disease. These are programs that usually last 2 or 3 days, and we fly patients and their caregivers in from all over the country to these, and we give them a really intense crash course on research ethics, informed consent, trial designs, and statistics, so that they are empowered to deal with some of those misconceptions that folks have. We also give them lectures on advocacy. We give them tips on public speaking, tips on how to write effective letters to the editor and to Congress, tips on how to use some of these different websites. Maybe the best part of the program is that there's a lot of time for discussion and debate between patients and faculty. We don't have all the answers, and we love to hear from you about some of the things that you're struggling with. In fact, that's how we learned about the fact that the clinicaltrials.gov website was not very user-friendly, and that's where we decided to put some resources into building more user-friendly tools for you. If you would like to apply for this, Devin Punch is the contact person. We've got her phone number and her email on this slide. We keep track of what our research ambassadors are doing. We've had this counter up now for only a few months. But what you can see is that they're out there actually beating the bushes to try to spread the word about the importance of enrollment in research studies. So most of them are writing on websites, but some of them are in newspapers, speaking at support groups, speaking to Congress, or writing to Congress. So to summarize my section of this, there's several barriers for why we don't right now have a cure for ALS. At the present time, the FDA is not a major one of these barriers. However, a surprising one is that we are not enrolling very well in our research studies. We can address this barrier together through specific advocacy action plans. And the bottom line is, the faster we enroll, the faster we finish our studies, the faster we get what we all want, which is the cure for ALS. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bedlock, and after our next speaker, we'll have time for questions. Our second speaker, Dr. David Banks, has been a good friend to the ALS community for a long time. He's actually been at the FDA since 1984 and played an instrumental role with working with myself and Annie Kennedy for the FDA hearing that lasted a full day for so many great stories. So, Dr. Banks?
Hello. I wanted to thank Steve and ALS Association for the honor to be here with you and to be on a program with Dr. Bedlock, your honoree today. The ALS Association is squarely in the first tier of advocacy organizations. And obviously, a big reason for that is because you all are here, you are involved. You're very fortunate to have the people working here like Steve, like Dr. Brunn, like Annie, who do so much, and they are absolutely expert at what they do. And I can tell you, I work with a lot of patient advocacy organizations from my job at FDA, and there's no patient advocacy organization who I personally hold in higher regard than the ALS Association. So a very brief introduction to what our office does. Our job and our passion is to work with stakeholders, to work with patients and advocates, to work with healthcare practitioners, to facilitate communication both ways, and to work with people like you so that we can better understand your needs and preferences, so we can be more responsive, so we can contribute to the important work that is being done to address the very real and very urgent unmet medical needs for diseases like ALS, like Alzheimer's disease, like multiple sclerosis, etc. As was mentioned, our office worked intensively recently with Steve, with Annie, to organize the meeting where many of you came, and it was a day devoted to listening to you describe your willingness to participate in a clinical trial, essentially regardless of the risk that trial might involve. It was, I can tell you, it was a very successful meeting in terms of what the experts at FDA learned about how to serve you better. And again, I want to thank the ALS Association for having played such a critically important role in making that meeting a success. What you're here to do today and this week, to advocate on the Hill and with elected officials and their staff, I don't have to tell you how important this is, but so much of lobbying has taken on a decidedly negative connotation. It's arm twisting for economic gain. I want to be explicit about this. What you are doing is noble and admirable. You are carrying a message that is born out of self-interest, but legitimate self-interest. It is a message that is rooted in your efforts to help people who desperately need that help. And for you to effectively communicate that message to the people you've elected to represent you is something that, as far as I'm concerned, there's no higher calling. I'm a cancer survivor myself, so I appreciate what you're going through, certainly at some level. I can't fully appreciate it, obviously, but I do appreciate the emotional dimension of what you're going through, the very steep learning curve. And in fact, all of you, I'm sure, are facing multiple steep learning curves in terms of diagnosis and management of ALS, learning curves in terms of advocacy, learning curves in terms of participation in clinical trial. Each one of these represents a very large body of knowledge, and to tackle all of them at once is a formidable set of tasks. And I want you to know that I appreciate how challenging that is. And our office has recently developed a website, a page on our website that I hope you'll find helpful. It's called the Patient Network, and it's part of the FDA website. It's brand new, developed by a coworker of mine, James Valentine, with our office. It includes clinical trials information. It includes information about drug development, about regulatory processes. I think you can find it to be a real valuable asset as you tackle these daunting informational challenges. So with that, I'll get into my slides. Again, our office recently changed names from the Office of Special Health Issues to the Office of Health and Constituent Affairs. As I said, we work with patients and advocates and healthcare practitioners. Our goal is to facilitate productive engagement, both in terms of outreach through our patient representative program, recruiting and bringing people in to advise FDA as FDA makes regulatory decisions, and also being responsive to concerns that are brought to us by advocates, by patient organizations, by physician specialty organizations, whatever. And also to facilitate communication in terms of sharing information, objective information about FDA decisions and about how you can be involved in those decisions. This is not going to be a history lesson, but my point is that there's a lot of history. There have been many, many laws passed by Congress, signed by the President, that a recent one was mentioned, there is a huge body of law that applies to FDA. And for anybody to be a competent regulator, they have to have a very substantial legal training in addition to their scientific, medical, technical training, etc. So we start with the laws, and then in addition to that, there are numerous federal court decisions. These precedents have the force of law. And then in addition, there is a very large body of federal regulations defining FDA's responsibilities as they relate to review of an investigational application or a marketing application. And then every decision that FDA makes becomes a regulatory precedent. So you put all these together, the processes and the standards are defined to a very great extent. There's still opportunity for FDA to exercise discretionary action, but it is a very structured process in a very structured environment, and it is almost entirely not one of our making, but one that comes from Congress or elsewhere, but one that FDA embraces. And one thing I've learned in my many years at FDA is that the people there really do try to behave in a way that reflects fidelity to the laws, as well as striving for scientific and technical excellence, and approaching our work as humble public servants to you. FDA has two primary missions, and this is, I think, an important point to make. The first one, protecting the public health. I won't read all that to you, but this is the role that is typically perceived to be the FDA role, and it's a role that often leads to an impression that FDA is cautious, in many cases unduly cautious, in terms of allowing testing and marketing of medical products. There's another mission, advancing the public health. I'll leave this up for a while so you can read both of these. The advancing the public health aspect is a very important part of what FDA does and how FDA thinks. Protecting and advancing, these two missions can be described as often being in direct conflict. A patient who is well treated with standard therapy will often want newly approved treatments to be well characterized and thoroughly tested so they can make better informed decisions. Whereas a patient not responding to standard therapy may feel a much more urgent need for new treatments, regardless of how thoroughly tested they are once they've been shown to offer a benefit. FDA tries to address both sets of needs, as I'll describe to you. As we talked earlier, it's a very structured environment in which FDA approaches these tasks, but again, the stereotype is that FDA is cautious, unduly cautious, but the reality is that FDA consistently prefers advancing public health over protecting public health, and I'll explain to you how that works. First, the review timeframes for applications are very tight. The typical review timeframe for a new investigational application, even though it includes a very substantial amount of data, is 30 days for this multidisciplinary, multi-level review. 30 days, very tight time frame. The review for a marketing application is months. It is again, very tight time frame to do a lot of work. FDA works very hard, in addition to reviewing these applications, to also provide detailed technical assistance to applicants. Sitting down with them face-to-face to advise them on how best to design their studies. And let's face it, if you are the FDA medical officer that's reviewed every epilepsy application for the past 5 years, is there anybody in the world who knows more about clinical research methods in epilepsy? And this information, this knowledge, this technical expertise is shared freely with researchers and medical manufacturers, not in a way that reveals what their competitor is doing, but assisting them so that they can design and conduct their studies in a way that will maximize the likelihood of success and do so as efficiently as possible. FDA is also willing to allow marketing of effective products with very substantial risks. And we'll talk more about that. FDA also works hard to provide information to prescribers and patients, including information so that patients can make informed decisions whether or not and how best to use a marketed product that involves serious risks. But FDA also does have a responsibility under federal law to protect patients from unreasonable research risks. We heard earlier about this concept of patients being used as guinea pigs. An important part of FDA's mission is to review investigational applications and to review them before the study begins to make sure that the study does not involve unreasonable research risks. Now, that doesn't mean that FDA doesn't allow risks, because any use of a medical product is going to involve risks. And in the investigational setting, those risks can be much greater just because of the degree of uncertainty. But where it's possible to anticipate risks, such as effective animal studies that can lead to appropriate selection of a dosage, a starting dosage in human trials, and learning, say, for example, this drug might be toxic to the liver, the animal studies can lead to insights into how to monitor liver function tests in people so that if the study subject's liver does respond negatively to this investigational treatment, it'll be possible to remove that patient from this study before they go into liver failure. These are the kinds of things that FDA does to help people feel more secure that they can go into a clinical trial and know that their legitimate interests are being looked out for at FDA. It also includes FDA not approving for marketing a product that offers no benefit. If a manufacturer cannot demonstrate that their product offers a benefit, then, that's the first hurdle in terms of a product being approved for marketing. And also protecting patients from health fraud and false and misleading information. The clinical development of a new treatment is a complex undertaking. There are many types of research questions that have to be addressed through these clinical trials. We don't need to go through all these, but I'll say that the clinical development of a new treatment is a complex and expensive undertaking, and it's not just that way in the U.S. These types of research are common throughout the industrialized world. This is how products are developed. There is a set of questions, such as you have to know what is the optimal dose of the drug, or at least a good dose of the drug, before you begin trying to answer the question of whether or not it is effective. And FDA provides a lot of assistance to researchers as they wrestle with these many, many types of research questions so that these new treatments can be tested and developed as expeditiously as possible. We don't have enough time to talk about drug development in detail, but briefly start with animal studies and then progress into small, brief phase 1 studies, generally in so-called normal volunteers, and then progress from there into phase 2 studies in patients, and then hopefully the findings are positive and will lead the manufacturer to pursue phase 3 studies that have the capacity to demonstrate that the treatment does offer a benefit and to learn enough about the risks to be able to write directions for use and to support marketing approval of the application. And then if the product is successfully approved for marketing, then phase 4 studies where they might address questions about use of the drug in special populations such as geriatric patients, patients with compromised kidney function, etc. Again, all medical research involves risks, and the FDA goal during drug development is to protect patients from unreasonable and significant research risks, again, taking into account the seriousness of the disease and the preferences of the patient population. And again, as was made clear at the recent FDA hearing, FDA heard loud and clear that the ALS community is willing to assume very substantial risks in order to participate in clinical trials and to access potential life-saving therapies. But the FDA review process is not just prospective, it's ongoing while the drug is in development. Ongoing monitoring of adverse event reports, looking at reports from completed studies, subsequent study proposals. It's an ongoing constructive engagement between FDA and the researchers and manufacturers that hopefully leads to a productive clinical and successful clinical development program. Again, the review team is a multidisciplinary team involving physician specialists. FDA has a whole team of neurologist physicians who also, in addition to that training, also have training in clinical trial design, statistics and review of clinical trial data, etc. Also, clinical pharmacologist who's an expert in examining absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion, bioavailability, things like that. A chemist who looks at the product and its quality, its stability, things like that. An animal research expert, if it's an antimicrobial, a microbiologist, and then a project manager. And then supervisors in each review discipline who collectively form the research team. So as you can imagine, this many people involved in these reviews within these tight time frames represents a very substantial logistical challenge. But FDA works effectively and deals with these applications effectively, primarily as a result of the people that are working very, very long hours. I can tell you, these people do not work 40-hour weeks, despite the stereotypes to the contrary. They work very, very long hours and under a great deal of pressure, because what could be a more difficult decision than a decision whether or not to allow a clinical trial or marketing of a treatment for you? Again, the IND involves prospective review of the protocols. An FDA allows clinical investigators wide latitude with design. They are free to innovate in terms of their clinical research methods, to develop new ways of measuring the disease, new ways of administering their product, so long as the study does not involve unreasonable research risks, and so long as it is capable of answering the research questions they're seeking to answer, FDA will allow them to proceed. And here are some links, some key links from the federal regulations. These can be made available to you if you wish after the fact. Okay. As was alluded to earlier, we don't really even have input into where research money goes, which diseases are targeted, which new products are developed, who does that, or how quickly a product is developed. We have no say whatsoever in terms of those decisions. What FDA does is to try to be responsive to anybody who comes to us. If a manufacturer or a researcher comes in and they want to file an investigational application, we are there and making every effort to be responsive and to provide assistance. And FDA has a very, very limited research budget. I mean, it's minuscule. There was an earlier question about expanded access. There's a wide array of terms that are used, such as compassionate use, treatment INDs, single patient INDs. The umbrella term that is often generally used at FDA is expanded access, which basically refers to use of a promising investigational medical treatment outside of clinical trials while it is in clinical trials. Obviously, the first priority here is to get this drug across a finish line, to hopefully successfully demonstrate that this is an effective treatment and that its benefits are characterized and its risks are known. So that's really generally the manufacturer's primary effort, is to get their drug developed and approved. But there are cases where expanded access is possible. FDA generally encourages and seeks to facilitate expanded access once a product has been tested to the point where it can reasonably be viewed as promising. But there are many good reasons why that might not happen. As was alluded to earlier, the manufacturer might not have sufficient production capacity. Expanded access, if it is too widespread, can potentially discourage enrollment in clinical trials, which could short-circuit development of the drug. In many cases, a manufacturer will make a business decision not to allow expanded access, and they're free to do that. We have no recourse. If they decide for any reason not to allow it, that's the end of the story until they might change their mind. But FDA, under a wide array of circumstances, is willing to facilitate expanded access so long as it doesn't undermine development of the treatment and there's a reasonable basis to anticipate that patients might benefit from it. Okay, if the product is successfully developed, the manufacturer can come in at a time of their choosing with their marketing application. FDA assess whether or not the drug provides a benefit and what are its risks. A key point here, many of you have heard the term risk-benefit ratio. That is an expression that truly is not used at FDA because it suggests that this is a mathematical formula that can be answered through some kind of mathematical formula. It doesn't work that way. Instead, once a product has been shown to provide a benefit, and again, that's key, once a product has been shown to provide a benefit, then it becomes a case of looking at the risks and is the relevant patient community willing to accept those risks? So It's a very different calculus than is widely perceived to be the case. The first goal of the review is whether or not to approve the drug, and then equally importantly is writing directions for use, the prescribing information that objectively describes what is known about the drug and how to use it in a way that maximizes the benefits and limits the risks to the extent possible. And the time frame is a maximum of 10 months for any priority application, which is not hard to achieve. It's 6 months. And our FDA patient representative program, we often have, or generally have, an FDA patient representative to participate in the deliberations that are part of this review process. These FDA advisory committees that are convened by FDA, outside experts who review the data, in addition to the FDA review, these outside experts review the data and advise FDA on important questions such as, has this drug been shown to be effective, and are the risks acceptable? These meetings are announced in the Federal Register and on the FDA website. They're open, public meetings, and they do a lot to provide for transparency of the FDA review processes, as well as adding value directly to the FDA review process. So here are some other resources. And then, very briefly, post-market review. The job doesn't end when a product is approved. There are various kinds of supplemental applications, such as an application for a new use, a review of advertising and promotion, important work in this context. And again, as we heard earlier, the FDA Patient Representative Program, we are currently reviewing a set of applications from the ALS community. For the Patient Representative Program, we are eager to expand the involvement of ALS patients in the Patient Representative Program and to expand the points of this involvement to include both review of marketing applications and also involvement during drug development, which, as a result of the new law, we have new authorities to achieve this. So we're very much looking forward to that. Meetings like the recent meeting, again, very important for advocates to engage with FDA so we can better serve you. And here are some other links. And thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. Are there microphones around the room? Yes, I know there's one back here. Questions? Who gets the mic first? We'll call on that person first. Okay.
My name is Al Eckhart. One of the things that I've run into when I go to see a doctor, we understand that there's different drugs that have been approved for other diseases, but certain studies have shown that they have helped people with ALS. Every time I've gone to a doctor and said, you know, there's been a study or there's, you know, something that has said that this drug will actually help ALS, is there a possibility of me being able to try it and see if it'll help me? It's a drug that's been approved for other diseases, but it has shown, you know, we all know the story of Viagra. You know, how it was you know, made for something else, but they found out that, you know, it helped in other areas. So I'm just simply saying that there's you know, there's drugs out there like that for ALS that could possibly help us, but I have a hard time convincing doctors to give me a prescription for any other medicines except for, you know, Rilotec.
Dr. Bedlack?
Sure. I'll give you my perspective on it, Rick Bedlack. So over the years that I've been working in ALS, I've sort of changed how I feel about this. I think when I first started off, I was a little bit more paternalistic about things like that. and felt like I had to try to convince you that the data wasn't good enough and I wasn't going to prescribe it for you as a result. And over time, I've kind of gravitated towards something that I call shared decision-making. So when my patients come to me with questions about the use of medications that are approved for other illnesses and want to try them for ALS, I try to find out everything I can about it. So you might bring me some information. I might take a few days to go and do some research about that and get back to you with assessment of the science of what it is that you're asking about, and also make a recommendation. And if after you hear that, you still want to do it anyway, then most likely I would help you to get a prescription for that. The only time I wouldn't do that is if after my review, I looked at it and felt that there was a pretty significant risk to your safety. I really can't write a prescription that I personally feel is a risk to my patient's safety. But if it looks like a wash or possibly better than a wash, and you've heard my side of it and you still want to do it, I would try to help you do it. The thing is that you can't expect every doctor, just like you can't expect every patient, to be the same way in a doctor-patient relationship. I mean, there's some patients and some doctors who prefer a paternalistic style. There's some that prefer a purely autonomous style, where patients come in and you can do whatever you want. And there's many, most in fact, that prefer shared decision-making. But one thing about shared decision-making that is challenging is that it takes time. And that's something that we don't have a lot of anymore in medicine. Luckily, with the help of groups like the ALS Association that fund our clinics, we are a little bit more flexible in how long we can spend with patients. But mainstream neurologists that don't have that kind of outside funding, they may only be able to spend 10 or 15 minutes with you every few months. And as a result, you're probably not going to get a very thoughtful investigation of the thing that it is that you're asking about. So that's my answer to that.
Okay, microphone over here.
Oh, I wanted to add a few things, and I agree with everything he said. FDA does not regulate the practice of medicine, which means that, as far as FDA is concerned, physicians are free to prescribe an FDA-approved drug for any use, both the approved uses and uses that are not approved. In addition, as I said, after a drug is approved, if the manufacturer wants to submit a supplemental application to have their drug approved for a new use, they're free to do that. But basically the same data standards apply. They have to demonstrate that for this new use, it is effective and to characterize the risks.
Okay. Tom?
Hi, my name's Tom Murphy. You probably heard my name a couple of times. I have a couple of questions, really, mostly for you, David Banks. The first one is, so I was one of the testifiers on February 25th. So we've heard a lot about how successful a meeting that was, a public session. I'm really interested in what's next for the FDA after that meeting. What are the next steps that are going to be taken by the FDA, given the information that you received at that meeting? That's one. And then I'm one of the applicants for the patient representative program, and I'm very interested in when, let's see, I think I applied in January, early January, and many and other people I know. And I'm interested in when we might hear something about when that might actually occur. And several of us have actually been interviewed, via phone. So I'm interested in that too.
Okay, in terms of next steps, part of it will be FDA officials participating in this upcoming technical meeting to talk about clinical development. In terms of what the next step, directly responsive to what was heard at the meeting, we're actively working on that. It won't be my decision, that's above my pay grade, but it is an ongoing process, and there is a universal appreciation that while FDA viewed that as a successful meeting, that you all are expecting an ongoing engagement, and I'm working hard to make that happen, and I promise you it will. In terms of the patient representative selections, I would describe them as imminent. And I hope that's sufficient detail.
Well, and one thing I want to follow up, Tom, on your question. As we said, we continually meet with the FDA, and I think some opportunities there are for patient advocates to be involved, and some, like this upcoming meeting next week that Dr. Banks talked about with researchers, is really just for researchers. There's a transition at the FDA. I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but the hearing that we actually held in February was the first time the whole division of neurology had ever had a hearing. So this is really historic, and it's an opportunity to really get more folks involved. We want to continue that. We have some transition at the FDA. Dr. Katz is retiring this June. A new division head will be, I'm not sure if he's ever named, has he, Dr. Farkas?
No, well, not yet. But
Okay. It'll be named shortly. There'll be somebody, and we plan to meet with that. And in fact, Annie and I will be having a meeting next week to talk more about what our outreach will be with our colleagues. So absolutely, we're not going to stop. That wasn't enough. We'll keep on advocating and keep on having a dialogue with them, including people with ALS.
I just have one more. So your letter, your joint letter with the MDA talked about, getting another stakeholder gathering together, including patients and others. And I'm really interested in that. Very specifically, is that meeting going to occur?
We're going to have a continued dialogue, and there will be several meetings. I think one of the challenges we have here is that we can advocate all we want to the FDA. There's another partner in this, and those are the biotech and pharmaceutical companies. And so as we shared with you, we want to work individually with you to see what are the next trials. What are the companies that need the assistance and need the input? And, it can't just be one meeting. It'll be many meetings. Okay. Over here. I can't see the light.
Hi. I had a question on the enrolling in the clinical trials. My mom was diagnosed with ALS in May of 2011. I got her signed up right away with the registry. We took her to Forbes Norris Clinic right away. Within a couple months, she had to get a feeding tube. And at that time, she could still swallow, but she wasn't eligible for any clinical trials. And so I also would get on the registry, and I would look all across the country to see maybe what trials she could do, and I would call them. I called, I'm from Northern California, but I would call Georgia. I remember calling Phoenix, and everybody was very nice, but it was always, well, check around your area. This is kind of a ways to come. Nothing was never like, yeah, that would be great, maybe she could try it. And so I guess my question is there more we can do so a person with a feeding tube can get in a clinical trial quicker than later? And then the other question would be, if our family and the patient's willing to spend the money and drive to Georgia or wherever, since enrollment sounds like it's low, why isn't that an option? Because in my mom's case, just for me as a family member, I would have liked to give her some hope. And I think participating in a clinical trial, even if it didn't fix anything, it would have given her some hope. She ended up passing away September 2012, so she didn't have a lot of time, but she really felt like she was sent home to die with no hope at all. So those are my two questions I have.
And I'm going to let Dr. Bedlock answer, but there's a session right after this where I think some other people might be very interested in that question too. But
Well, thank you very much for telling me about that. So first things first, I think it's important to realize that your mom did participate in research by signing up for the National Registry. And I think that whenever somebody signs up for any kind of research study, we have to make sure that they understand the benefit to the whole community so that they get hope and altruism out of what they did there. So yes, I would like to see the trial inclusion-exclusion criteria expanded. The thing is that, as we were talking about this morning, right now, ALS, we know it's a syndrome. We know that it's not one disease. And so the more we expand those inclusion-exclusion criteria to take in folks with different forms of ALS, the more noise we're going to bring into our trials. And that means that the trials with these outcome measures that we have right now are going to have to be larger in number and take longer, which means they're going to be more expensive. And so there's always a trade-off between letting more folks come in and between increasing the amount of noise in the study. Now, hopefully, as we get smarter about ALS subtypes, we'll be able to have more trials for more different subtypes and follow them sort of as distinct subtypes within a trial, do subgroup analyses. So I think that's really where the hope lies for getting more folks in. And then last but not least, I'll say that you did a lot of legwork. Hopefully the new trial Concierge program will prevent people from having to do so much legwork, so there'll be one person in the whole United States, whose name and phone number and email are out there, so that folks can find out, what, if any, options do they have for various types of research around the country. And the issue of not living close to the site is really kind of determined, on a case-by-case basis. Usually we're not told by the sponsor of a study that a person has to live within X number of miles. We're usually told that they should live reasonably close by so that if something medically were to happen, they could get into a hospital you would be comfortable with and we could find out what was going on. Because remember, when we're doing trials, especially early phase trials, we really don't know what's going to happen. Some of the trials that are out there, this is the first time the drug's ever been given to a human being. So having somebody who has to fly 8 hours to get to where I am, taking a drug that's the first time it's ever been given to a human, I don't feel great about that. I mean, I'm a little nervous about it. So there's reasons for all these different things, but I do think we have to keep the dialogue open, and I do think we're making some progress toward your goals, which I share.
Great. We have time for one more question. We have to break for lunch. Is there any question? I can't see the light. Who's the mic?
The mic is one to you.
Okay.
Marriott, I'm an ALS clinical clinician and trialist. So we go to a lot of FDA meetings with companies, and we learn a lot about what the FDA would like to see for outcomes and trial design. But it's always siloed, and it's not the FDA's fault. There's confidentiality that we can't then go and share that with another company. But in other areas, FDA has written a white paper to actually share all that information. And given all the knowledge you now have from all these ALS trials, is that a possibility the FDA could really put that information out there so all companies and all investigators have it?
Funny you would mention that. Dr. Bedlock and I were just discussing that. And this is something I welcomed him that we engage in a continuing dialogue on this. FDA does generate treatment guidelines. The challenge is when the research field is in such a state of flux, as is currently the case with ALS, the challenge is sometimes that the treatment guideline is outdated when a day after it issues. And that's why FDA really does actively encourage researchers and manufacturers to come in and meet with the agency so that they can benefit from leading edge assistance that will in many cases go far beyond what the treatment guide or what the drug development guideline for that disease or condition might ever discuss. But as we discussed, there probably is some valuable information that could be made available through a guideline that could supplement this face-to-face assistance. So we'll talk about this further and work on it and see what we can do.
Great. Well, thank you all. We're going to break for lunch, and we have another session.